Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in to us today. This is the first of what we hope will be many roundtable discussions. I'm Donna Farrell, I'm Director of Marsh Mackey Recruitment and a Director of County Meath Chamber, and I'm delighted to be chairing this discussion today. A massive thank you to our sponsors of today's roundtable discussion, HRS Consultants, and this topic today that we're going to discuss is returning to the workplace safely, a business perspective. To discuss this topic today, I have an excellent panel joining me. I have Aoife Mcdade, Employer Engagement Officer with LMETB. I have Joanne Kinahan-Wall, Group HR Cusack Hotels and the Knightsbrook Hotel in Trim. I have Paul McGlynn, Employment Law Expert with HRS Consultants, our sponsor. And I have Tanya Clark, who's Head of HR with IVL Wellman International. And also joining us is Fiona Gilroy, a Business Development Manager with College Group. Thank you all. It's so lovely to have everyone here in the flesh. We really appreciate you all being here today. So for the benefit of our viewers, I might start with you, Aoife. Can you give us a brief background on what you do in LMETB and just give us a little insight?
Sure, thank you. My name is Aoife Mcdade and I work with LMETB as Employer Engagement Officer for Meath and for Louth. So I suppose in my role I work with employers to support them with funded training opportunities for upskilling and reskilling their employees, and we also work with the workforce, with employees to directly access funded training opportunities. And I suppose my role is quite broad, so you're working with employers, and so many different areas that they're looking for support with. So thank you very much for having me here.
Okay, and next Joanne, as Group HR with Cusack Hotels and Knightsbrook. Obviously the hospitality has been hit hard, but can you just give us a brief outline of your role there?
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Group HR Training and Development for the Knightsbrook Hotel, Spa and Golf Resort in Trim, and for the Cusack Hotel Group, which is made up of the Castle Arch Hotel in Trim and the Ardboyne Hotel and the lovely New Grange that you're in today in Navan. So I suppose it's the all-round package. It's dealing with the employees from start to finish, their development. We try and internally promote as much as we can between the four hotels.
And can I just ask you there, how many staff do you have, when obviously at full operation?
Yeah, so I suppose pre-COVID, between the four hotels, we would have had about 540. When we looked at it, the end of March, we had about 300 staff. And at the moment, we're still recruiting and we're still short about 120 staff. And I won't say it's been easy, it's definitely been a challenge for us because we lost a lot of staff. Yeah,
and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail as well, because it's a very interesting area and I think everyone's been probably hit in some ways. Paul, HRS Consultants, give us a little insight into your work.
Okay, Paul McGlynn, HRS Consultants. We provide support to the HR function of different businesses in a number of different sectors, and we also do representation in the Workplace Relations Commission and the Labour Court. I suppose the idea of all the work we do is to prevent ending up in the Workplace Relations Commission or the Labour Court, and a lot of that is around being a good place to work and maintaining an informal relationship with staff, but at the same time knowing when to move into the formal and following the correct procedures to protect the organisation from expensive claims.
Which is huge, especially through COVID and remote workers and everything. And again, we'll kind of explore that hopefully a little bit later on. Tanya, tell us a little bit about your role as Head of HR. They're an international company as well, which is interesting.
Yeah. I'm Tanya Clark. I'm the Head of HR with Wellman International. We're part of a global organisation, hence the name Indorama Ventures Limited. They employ about 20,000 employees worldwide. When we started out with IVL back in 2011, we were one of a small pool of companies. They're now acquiring a lot of different companies, so we're now a pool, I think, of about 200 companies worldwide. Wow. We manufacture polyester, which We recycle, if you go back in the chain, we recycle plastic bottles. So it's amazing how your plastic bottle can then be converted then into a raw material, which is your polyester. So that goes into your products like your baby's nappies, your fem care, your incontinence, and that's where the hygiene market then comes in for us. So during COVID, we were deemed to be an essential market or an essential manufacturer. We then have the automotive industry. So we manufacture for the car industry, your car panels, your boot liners, your parcel shelves. You then the geotextile industry, and then your everyday home commodities. So your duvets, your pillows, your home furnishings.
Right.
So a wide variety of end products. We've about 270 people employed within Wellman. The majority of people would be on 12-hour continuous shifts, and then we have our support functions as well on site. We're a 24/7 operation as well.
Okay, very good. And a huge range of products there as well, like from nappies to car manufacturing.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's actually an amazing process, and to even see, and I'm with the company for quite a considerable amount of time and still learning really about the new products coming on board, a very innovative company. And also having IVL on board is an excellent opportunity for Wellman to progress.
And on the manufacturing side of it, just is that a huge transition from, say, the actual operational side, the manufacturing aspect of production lines? Does it have to shift a whole lot from when you're doing your product for your nappy to automotive industries? Like, is that a huge turnaround for the plant?
They would have it planned in that different products, different days. So in my role, I would look after everything from recruitment and selection, training and development, organisational development, performance management, succession planning. We're losing a lot of people over the next 5 years, so continuously working ahead, working on succession planning, upskilling, making sure that we have enough versatility and flexibility among the workforce. And similar to Paul, making sure, I suppose, the compliance of the policies and procedures, and a lot of new legislation coming on board with HR as well. So just making sure that we're ahead of the game there as well to avoid any disputes. We're a very heavily unionised organisation, so we have 4 unions on site.
Right, okay, interesting. And Riona, yourself, last but not least.
No. So I'm Riona. I am the Business Development and HR Manager for the College Group. College Group is a family business, and we're based in Nobber, and we have a site in Munnery in Cavan as well. And we are an animal wastage and rendering business, as well as a newly established biofuels facility. So we use the tallow that comes out of our site in Nobber, and we are producing green fuel, which is a huge project at the moment, which is only live in the last sort of 2 years, but it's been a big project in terms of, I guess, feeding into that biocircular economy in Ireland. So yeah, and in terms of my role within the group, it sounds familiar to Tanya and Paul. HR definitely keeps you on your toes, so cover a lot of that stuff off. So I would oversee our HR function as well as our business operations, and a good bit around business development and sales.
And how many staff do you have between both?
So on site in Nobber we would have about 100, and then in our Cavan facility we have about 40, so about 140 employees in total. Similar to Indorama, we were deemed essential at the beginning of the pandemic, due to the fact that we handle any kind of animal waste in a very safe way. So we were deemed an essential business.
Service. And I suppose everyone, obviously aside from hospitality here, we're working through the COVID period. Everyone was, you as well, Aoife, were you?
I started with LMETB in COVID, so I've only ever worked remotely in that sense. Yeah.
Oh, right. Oh, did you? Yeah, right. Okay, yeah. So that must have been an interesting process.
It was definitely, an interesting way to start with anybody. I worked as a buyer in a previous role, so I was well used to, I suppose, travelling and remote working, in the sense that, sometimes my working week was through hotels or whatever.
Yeah, so it was an easier adjustment.
Yeah, so I was probably a little bit more adapted to that that way of working anyway. But it's also been a great way to connect with people. Everyone has been so available in a way they may not have been available in normal times. The Teams meeting is so much more accessible to people, they're more familiar with it, as opposed to maybe travelling, you know, possibly an hour if I was to visit yourself or yourself, you know, that, so
I think
positives.
that's probably the positive thing about it, is that the Zoom or the Teams meetings, are like, people can say, right, I'll do that meeting from 10 to 11, and it's not going to eat into too much of your working day, because you don't have to travel, or, you know, sometimes meetings don't start on time as well when you're there in person, you know. So that was one good thing about a good.
And even I think from the perspective, I mean, for me in my role, a lot of what I do is, you know, organising trainings, and, you know, with the pandemic, it has been online, which has its own challenges for people, and I suppose that's where our wraparound supports in the ETB come into play, to support people to be, you know, able to go online, whether that's support with hardware or whatever that might be. But for employees, it's made it so much easier to access training, because I suppose typically you do your working day, you have family life, you have home life, you have your personal life. There's no commuting to, there's not that additional commute to a centre or a college or a school. You know, you're at home anyway, or you come home, but you're logging on in your home office, or some employers have allowed people to access, you know, conference rooms, or they have those kind of facilities. But it's made it so much easier, I think, for a lot of people to access training.
And what kind of challenges, like, or I suppose difficulties, have you come up against? I know, like, obviously there are the positives there, which are good, but, you know, from the students' perspective, what challenges have you come up against, even, you know, in regards to placements and that side of it?
I suppose there's various challenges. Broadband, access to broadband, hardware. I mean, they're just very basic. How do you get online? You know, can you get online? For some people, learning online is a challenge. You know, coming back maybe into learning environment is its own newness, and then you're faced with, you know, for some people, you know, we use computers, all of us, all day, every day. We're very used to it. For some people, they're not so used to that. It's uploading and downloading documents and files, that's a new skill. So for us and for me, a part of the learning of dealing with people is supporting with one-to-one mentoring with trainers, additional supports, induction courses for some groups before they start, where they're giving maybe a digital training before they start on a course. But really, I think just staying in touch with the learner at all times to make sure that they're okay, that they can access what they need to access. And we have had, you know, an amount of hardware that we've been able to support people with in a loan scheme, you know, for the duration of the course.
It's one thing that crossed my mind as well, the infrastructure of, you know, the Wi-Fi and people's availability, like, and which will feed into remote working as well, I'm sure, because, you know, if the infrastructure isn't there, then, you know, somebody in Cavan should be able to work just as well as somebody in Dublin remotely, like, you know, but I don't know if the infrastructure is actually in place there. But
no, I think there's definitely some black spots around the county, you know, and there are challenges, you know, and I think, and the hardware device, that's a challenge, you know, particularly when the kids were being homeschooled. For some homes, that's where the device needed to be, was with a child in the home who was attending school, I suppose. So this is where I suppose we were able to step in, and there were lots of different supports and to be able to help people with that.
And how can you plan ahead now, or how far can you plan ahead?
As a piece of string, oh my gosh. I mean, everything, I mean, you know, as you know yourself there, even with the hospitality, it's, I think, you know, look, you'd love to have everybody back into a classroom, but we'll know that closer to September. Some sort of a blended learning will probably be where we'll be at. But
would you prefer to see everyone back in, or did you, because I sense it was positive enough experience?
I think a healthy mix. I think there's room for both, and a blended approach, definitely. I think for a lot of people, to be able to access learning online is what makes it accessible, and is what's able to get them to that finish line. But the face-to-face is important, and I think I suppose when you do any sort of a course, whether it's 12 weeks or a year, you know, having your group that you're training
Yeah.
with, and that support network with each other, and those discussion groups. And
Yeah,
things,
you
and
can bounce off each other. Yeah,
you know, and breakout rooms are super, and you know, we've all gotten so,
Yeah.
you know, kind of, you know, we're learning as we go and we're adapting as
Yeah,
we go.
yeah.
So, you
They're
know,
actually quite good, those breakout rooms.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
do get a little bit of connectivity there with smaller groups, like,
Yeah.
so it gives people a chance, maybe more reserved people who wouldn't speak out
Yeah.
in a bigger group, you know, it just gives them that opportunity.
we had a great one with the Chamber a couple of weeks back. It was one of the business network meetings where when you went into your breakout rooms, I don't know if anyone else was on this one, you were told whoever's wearing glasses has to start
Oh,
the
that's right.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah,
or-
yeah.
And
The colour
everyone
of your
has
shirt.
to say
Yeah,
what they did at the
yeah.
weekend. But there was
Yeah.
nice little softwares.
Yeah.
They were nice techniques to
Yeah,
take
very
away.
good. Yeah, because sometimes everyone just stays quiet as well. It's
Yeah.
like, who's going to talk first?
Yeah.
Joanne, I wanted to just kind of move to you, and obviously hospitality has been devastated by current events and everything around that. I just wanted to ask you, how are you managing returning to work safely? I know the can has been kicked down the road again for you, but how, as I say, you went from 500 staff and that was kind of...
Yeah, like overnight, we laid off all our staff, including, you know, HR role.
Yeah, yeah.
But as you know, like HR doesn't stop. You still have your employees. They're still
course, yeah.
your employees. So I think the first lockdown was tough, but we got to be very innovative. So it was important that we kept in touch with the staff. We developed a training academy so that they could do a lot of training online, a bit like that. There was an opportunity rather than it be, you know,
Yes.
the situation that it was. So first lockdown, we got very creative. So we developed training academy. We had emailed everybody. Again, like the flaws come out, the wrong email addresses, the wrong
Yeah.
mobile numbers. Like it
Yeah.
was like as
I
if you
know.
could stop time and do a sudden cleanup of everything. It's great, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And that helped keep in touch. And I think one of the key things from the first lockdown, and it is each lockdown has a different thing. The first lockdown was very much a lot of scared. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
How are we going to get paid? And you know, personally, I was in that boat as well to go to what is the pub? How do we work this?
Yes, yeah.
But in that time then we also realised how important it was to kind of get contracts online, handbooks online. How could we facilitate moving forward? So we looked very much towards the future. So the first lockdown was extremely tough. It was as new, everyone was in the same boat
Yeah.
for hospitality. We didn't know how we were going to come out of it. So I think when we opened up the first time, so in Knightsbrook, for example, some of the departments got to open slightly earlier. So golf opened in May.
Yeah.
In June, then it was, I think it was the leisure centre opened.
Right,
and then we
yes,
slowly opened up.
Yeah.
Then thankfully they brought the 20th of July forward. We were all about dates within hospitality.
Yeah.
And it's because we have to plan as an industry.
Yeah.
And it was touch and go. You know, it was getting an induction that was right. It was keeping up with the government guidelines. They changed quite a bit. You were trying to communicate that. First lockdown, people coming back, there was a lot of people who were nervous. A lot of people didn't want to come back. It was the summertime.
Yeah.
They just homeschooled their kids. They
Yeah.
wanted a break, if you like.
And just on that, and around the PUP, do people, are they using it possibly as an excuse not to go back to work, the PUP, or do you feel that no, the majority are now keen to get back? And
So when we opened up in July in the summer, it was very hard to get people back. When we closed again in October, it was again quite hard in December. So we did have to try and take a very hardline approach. That being that if people were feeling anxious or, you know, at this
Yes,
stage,
yeah.
so December's probably more of an impact of the PUP. And in December, we kind of took the approach if people were anxious, then they needed to go and see their doctor. The PUP
Yeah.
was an unemployment payment if we did not have hours for them. And we did have hours for them. And we
Yes.
were trying to get them back. And for them to understand that this wasn't an unemployment benefit if we had the
Yes.
hours.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
staff who would only work 1 to 2 days were the ones actually, we found it very difficult to get them
Yeah.
back. Why would
Yeah.
they? They were getting
Yeah.
350
I know,
euros
yeah.
where they were used to just getting
Yeah.
2 days.
And what way does that work? Maybe Paul, you'd have some insight into this. I'm not sure, but you know, if an employee is saying no, I'm not coming back for those 2 days, you know, where does that leave the employer? Do they contact then social welfare? But then obviously you're kind of, the trust between you and the employee is disintegrating. So what happens in that scenario?
The PUP is a layoff payment.
Right,
so the PUP payment, and this is what we would emphasise to employers, is that in circumstances where I lay you off, the employer initiates that, then you're entitled to the PUP payment. If I've got work for you, whether it's 1 day or 5 days, I can then look for you to come back. I would then confirm to you that I do have work for you. You're no longer on layoff. I would advise you in writing to sign off and inform you that in any communications we're having with the department, we will be informing them that you're no longer on layoff and not entitled to the
so the
PUP
employer
payment.
can contact the department and say, look, this person is...
Yes, it's important.
But does that destroy the relationship with me? I'm after being laid off, like, oh, you went and told I'm not going to work for you anymore anyway. Or, you know, does it create... what I'm trying to get at, it does it create a bad taste?
Well, but in any employment, what you're trying to create is fairness. So what the business has to manage is who do we require back and the fairness of the order and in doing that. And then, so when we decide that it's time for you to come back and we've decided it's fair in whatever criteria we used for return to work, well then it's time for you to return to work. It's unfair to allow you dictate and start deciding then that you're not coming back because you'd love to sit at home on 350 euro.
Exactly, which is good. Have you come up against that much? Or?
So we, like, to be honest with you, now we're lucky. We have, if I'm totally honest, we have 4 staff out of our entire crew who are refusing to come back. And we've been lucky because actually social welfare now have intervened and asked what can they do to support us, which, to be honest with you, it's lucky. We haven't had to break that relationship with employees because what they're trying to do is, which I understand, it's, you know, it's people are paying tax for this supplement as well. Is provide them with a list of who came back when to make sure they've closed the claim, because you do have staff who've come back and haven't closed the claim, but we aren't aware of that.
Right, yes.
But we've taken the approach when people haven't contacted us is that, as Paul was saying, is like it's an unauthorised absence, and we've gone down that route, and we've had to go down that route. We've gone down the route with carers leave. So, you know, a lot of people want to stay at home, but the advantage of carers leave was they could stay at home and also work. So I suppose you're becoming more of it's literally like a human resource again, because you're trying to provide them with the resources that they need to make it work. And then from a business point of view, we need these people back. So, you know, you can only chase so many, and with so many employees, we've been lucky. I mean, we really have. We have a great crew. We learned an awful lot about our staff. We had staff who were eager to come back. You know, I'd love to help out and paint.
That's brilliant.
And the government supports with the, as we call it, the EWSS, the TWSS, the CRSS. I feel like we keep saying jokingly, we need to have a whistle at the end of this, but you know, that's been massive because we've been able to bring back staff who, although we weren't open, like we got painting done, we got the grounds done. You know, there was all those little jobs you don't get a chance to do. And there was people who were eager to work. They didn't want to be at home.
It's fantastic.
So they got to reskill, and they, you know, we had bar staff who were learning reception skills. You know, and
that's brilliant. Longer term as well, because people can switch in. You know, if you are short on staff, people can switch in seamlessly then, you know, and that. I was just going to ask you about the wage subsidy scheme, but did that help you hold on to the original, I suppose, your good staff that you wanted to hold on to? Like, did it?
The original TWSS, it was and it wasn't, because it was... The original TWS was quite difficult to deal with because it was based on what they earned in the first 9 weeks. So people who were on maternity leave were ready to come back to work, but they weren't on the subsidy scheme, and we had no income coming in, so we couldn't support them. So from their point of view, we were talking to revenue, why can't they? You know, they were just on maternity leave. And then because most of colleges were closed and didn't go back till January, these guys had the full entitlement because they worked over Christmas. So suddenly, if they were in college, they'd only do a day a week and they were getting the full 350. They had no interest in coming back. The EWSS is a lot more flexible, to be honest with you. And it is working for us as an employer, it's working for the staff. Because they're not too stuck on it. I think the majority difficulty on the subsidy is that the banks won't acknowledge. So you have staff who are going for mortgages and they're looking for letters and the banks are saying, are you on a subsidy scheme? And we are, but we're still paying staff. Like it's still our money that's paying them. So, you know, it'd be great if, you know, the banks could even just look at that for staff.
Exactly. I've come across that as well, and it's just ridiculous, really.
It's unfair.
But, and then you're training of new recruits now. Obviously, is that mostly online, or how's that going?
If I'm totally honest, it's like it's a complete overwhelming, if you like, because we lost so much, and you try to recruit and you do an induction at the start and then it's full on and you actually can't keep up. So one of the things, again, we tried to do last year was to put the induction online, but then COVID came, stopped, we're still trying to organise that. It's just a never-ending circle, and you're dealing with a completely new generation that relates to hospitality, because hospitality is like, you know, it's hardcore, old school, do what you're told, speak when you're spoken to. And now you have a generation that are like, actually, I think I need a mindfulness break.
Exactly.
Like, have you seen this stuff? Or I need a mental health day, and you're like, I get it, but you know.
It is new,
And everything is an insta-second. You know, it's like, they want an answer now. And I don't know if it's our generation are jealous that they figured this out at a young age because we're only figuring it out now, or is it that, you know, they're coming in? It's definitely a generation gap now, and I don't think we've ever hired as many 16, 17-year-olds in hospitality. And it's tough because when you've lost that amount of staff and you have your good, you're totally reliant on your stronger staff, you know.
Which kind of puts more pressure on them probably as well, because they're doing their job, but then they're also training the new generation.
And it's just, I feel like sometimes we're just in the circle going round and round and round. And, you know, I feel bad for the restaurants and the bars. They're in the situation now, they're put out for another 2 weeks. But the hotels, like, weddings are bread and butter. We still have 50. But to be honest with you, we still have to train those staff up from, you know, the expectation is there. And management have had a lot more time to think about where the gaps are, what they would like to do. It's actually trickling that down to deal with the different generation and to train them up into the expectation. And I know it's silly, but like learning how to carry a glass filled with water on a tray, they look at you and you're like, okay, what am I missing? You know, it's like the trainer again, like you're saying, you know, do show, and you're just like, and the patients, it's all, they want to learn it now, and they're very hard on themselves when they don't get something really quick. So you're kind of turn into this therapist on top of HR sometimes at the moment. So it's a bit, like, I know, sorry, I know,
it has
but
been part
that's what it
of
is.
COVID as well. Even in our own business in recruitment, we found that, you know, from the early start, part of the lockdown, that, you know, a lot of what we were doing was the emotional aspect of am I safe in work, and talking them through that side of things, as well as just the operational side of it. So I think employers have had to kind of become, as you say, almost therapists in some ways to employees, which probably is no harm, but at the same time it's an added
I think they've had to relook at the definition, if you like, of human resources. That, you know, they are your fixed assets, your current assets. Do you know what I mean? You need them so much more. Do you know?
Absolutely. Tanya, I want to move to you, and just obviously working in an international global company. How have you adapted through COVID? And as we've already said, you're a 24/7 operation with 280 staff there?
270.
270. How has that been, you and HR managing that? Or how did you manage?
It's been great. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I suppose from the very onset of COVID, like prior to COVID, we were, you know, normal business going like 24/7 and office staff 9 to 5, 8 to 4, and then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And immediately it was like, you know, we're deemed an essential business. I remember one weekend getting all of our essential travel letters out, getting our text alerts out, getting calls from supervisors, and then in the background also managing, you know, I'm not quite sure what happens if I have to quarantine or I'm a high risk, and managing all of that as well in the background. So that was the very onset. Certainly the 24/7 operation, we had to look very, very quickly at the minimisation of risk for the business. So while we had to look after the health and well-being of our employees, we also had to make sure our business was still operational. So there were things that we had to look at, like shift handovers, crossover of shifts. We had to stop all of that and very quickly start to consult with unions, and we had 4 unions to consult with. And how do you do that in a timely manner? Overtime was just not possible. So again, making sure that we had full flexibility across shifts. We were very fortunate, to be honest with you. Our employees were amazing. And the amount of credit, and we still continue to say it to them, our absenteeism during COVID was the lowest it possibly ever was.
Wow.
So we were very, very lucky.
That's great.
Employees turned in for work. You know, we case managed a lot in terms of, you know, I may have the elderly parent, I may have the brother or sister, I have somebody in the house being tested, but we were able to work very closely with them. And I do believe, and I think at the very end of this, like, I'm a very strong believer in communication and engagement with employees. And I think that's that's really key to all of this, that you continue, as we even work through the government, you know, the safety return to work protocol, that it's all about engaging with the employees, communicating with them, and all about looking at their well-being when they come back to work as well, and out of work. The refusals, the things, I'm listening to Joanne there as well. We also got our CMO on board, so our company medical doctor, and would have worked a lot very closely with him in terms of case management, relied on him really in terms of the medical guidance. The office workers, I suppose we were forced into a situation where remote working became the norm. Like, if we had looked at this a year prior to COVID, would we have said we would have looked at remote working? Possibly not. It's not for every role within the organisation. And again, that's something that needs to be looked at, because you need to remember, while you have the employees on site, you need to remember that, you know, you also have people that you need to check in on. You need to train your supervisors to make sure that, you know, people have clear accountability for their roles, that they're still performing while they're not in the office, that they know what's expected of them. You've that fear as well of isolation with employees. So
it doesn't suit everyone.
Absolutely. You know, if we're in the office, you meet somebody at the coffee room making a coffee or something like that.
And I think that's a huge part of being in an office environment as well, just that that communication, that social interaction with your colleagues as well. So the remote has taken that away. Like, I know some employers implement like a coffee Zoom or something like that, where you're not allowed to talk about work, just talk about, I don't know, Coronation Street or whatever you're for 10 minutes, but which is probably good. But is it hard to manage? Did you find it hard to manage the remote worker? You know, how did that shift work for you? Or did you get any insight from your international colleagues?
I suppose we would have initially have had a lot of guidance and a lot of instruction directed by corporate to us, and continue to rely on them in relation to travel and their guidance. Again, they would have really have left, because you've got a lot of different cultural differences and a lot of different restrictions. It was really relying, I suppose, on our government protocol here in Ireland, working with corporate as well in terms of the check-ins with them. They're excellent in terms of their communications. So, you know, those regular webinars with us, certainly I would have 2 very senior HR directors that I would report indirectly to in Indonesia and also Germany. So the regular check-ins and, you know, keeping up to date on what's going on in the industry, how they're dealing with COVID internationally.
And in regard to the future, the hybrid type of I suppose, unconstrained worker, is that something that you would like to implement where you are now that you've experienced it through COVID with your workers? Do you think that would be something that you'd like to see going forward?
I suppose just on where we've been lately is just, I suppose, on a phased return back into the workplace. So at the moment, a lot of our employees are coming back in maybe 2-3 days a week.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's something that we as a business have yet to look at. I think it's been, in the meantime, trying to manage that return, make sure everybody's safe, returning safely. And again, I think as time goes on, it's something that we haven't yet made a decision on, Donna.
Yeah,
it's something that we do need to stand back and look at. And I also think we're going to have some learnings from it as well, which we're going to have to critique as a business.
But I think some employers, it could be quite a positive thing, because you'll probably find that for the employees that it does work for, that it's positive for them. They'll stay with you longer, you know, and you know, that relationship with the employee would probably be stronger, because the trust is there. But an interest in the hybrid type situation is an interesting way forward for some employers. Paul, I just wanted to ask you a few things. Riona, I'm going to get to you then. But so I suppose interested to hear, you know, your thoughts on what challenges your clients have come up against throughout COVID, good, the bad and the ugly and all that sort of thing.
Like Tanya was saying there, they didn't take a view on remote working before. I actually came across one particular client, and they were actively resistant to remote working to the extent that they took on an employee a couple of months before COVID, and the employee suggested that maybe they could work 1 or 2 days from home because there was a bit of travel involved. And the employer took the attitude, you know, the office is here, you want the job, you come and you sit at the desk in the office because this is where we're located. So, and was taking the view, the cheek of him to come up with this suggestion, we're offering him a job here in this town, in this building. And it was a total change of view from that when COVID hit. And he was saying, you know, we're bringing all these people in, and by the nature of the work, they're bringing their laptop with them, they're opening up the laptop, they're working away on the laptop for the day, they close the laptop, they go back into the car, they drive home. And he's saying, well, and we're renting this big office.
Exactly,
and he said, look, we could rent a room for a day or a half a day, have our weekly meeting, and that's really all we need in the week, and then we do more remote working. The surveys are saying, though, that people don't want to go into 100%, employees don't really want to work 100% from home. They want more of it, but not all of it. And there is that social aspect that, you know, of interaction with employees that people like and people need and people want. And I suppose that's part of the challenge. Businesses are looking at, I suppose, have to look at the business has probably changed. There's a lot of uncertainty, and the business itself doesn't know what's happening. And as Tanya was saying about communications is vitally important, and sometimes it's communicating, you know, that we don't know, rather than saying, well, we'll wait until we know and then we communicate. Taking people on that journey with you, and I think this is part, in this there's an opportunity for companies in getting people involved at an early stage in the decision-making process. So things that we should have been doing all along, we can do, and it's an opportunity to show that, you know, even when it's a very difficult situation, we don't panic and say, well, now we're the management, we're going to make all the decisions, and we'll let you know what decision we arrive at, rather than getting the involvement, which is going to get ownership. And as Joanne was saying, the key thing is that, you know, employees are vital in every business, and it's what you can't get in the contract and procedures is that, you know, we're all on the same side. You know, we've all an interest in the business. If the business doesn't survive, none of us have jobs. So there's an interest in that, and it's getting people involved in communicating and getting people involved in the decisions.
And do you know, one of the, you know, the fact that the remote worker, and obviously if it's a 9 to 5, people go into the office, you're working 9 to 5, you're there, I see you in the office, you're working, and you go home. Managing a remote worker, you have to have a very different mindset, don't you? It's not like you can't really micromanage somebody. How does the employer really, I suppose, manage them? Because obviously there's all aspects around the right to disconnect as well. Like there's, you know, just that whole area of it can't be that confined. You're working 9 to 5 at home. Yeah,
I think, and if you look at the better companies, and I suppose that's what we should be trying to look at and trying to imitate what they're doing, is you're looking at what's been done as against how many hours have been done. I don't think any of us want that to have an employee that's saying, well, I work from 9 to 5 and it's 4:45 now, so I have to wait 15 minutes until the clock hits 5 and then I walk out. Or regardless of where the work is. And I suppose it's putting a focus on measuring, you know, what level of tasks do we expect to get done if we were in the office, and we expect that to get done, and we're not really that bothered whether it's done at between 4 and 5 or 7 and 8. But taking account of what you're saying in relation to, and this is something that we have to be mindful of, the Working Time Act, that you know that if you're working between 7 and 8, that you're getting the 11-hour daily break, you know, and there's a responsibility on the employer to ensure that that time is being managed well.
But is that up to the employee to advise the employer? Yes, I'm taking my breaks.
There's an obligation on the employer to record the hours that are worked. And we have to have a record of the hours that are worked. So if in the Workplace Relations Commission, if you go to the WRC and the employee is saying, I worked too many hours, the AO officer will turn around to the employer and say, well, can you provide a record of what days Paul worked and how many hours he worked and when he took his breaks, and where the sign off of that by the employee is. And if the employer can't come up with that, they just simply turn to the employee and say, now you tell me how many hours you worked, and just say I was working from 9 to 5 days a week, and I start saying, well, I worked from 7 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, 6 days a week. The employer's jumping up and down in the chair saying, you know, he's telling lies. And the AO officer will turn around and say, sorry, you've had your opportunity. You're after telling me you're not compliant with the legislation. You're not doing what you're obliged to do by law. Now I'm getting the evidence. And the evidence of the employee is accepted in full. As full and fine. So it's very important that we're complying with the Act and the breaks. And we've all seen the Keypack case on the news where the employee was away, the manager was working and getting emails at night time. And then when she left, she made an issue of it, and there was an award of €7,000 made because she felt under pressure to respond to emails that were after hours. So I suppose we should avoid sending emails after hours for a start, and if we do, that there's something on the email saying that there's no obligation to reply straight away. Reply to this email that you're doing it after hours.
And does that fall under the right to disconnect? You know. You have a right to disconnect, and I suppose, and what you're looking at anyway is that there's a good work-life balance, and that you're compliant with and they all kind of gel together in the work. And so, are you saying then, if you've got a remote worker, really you should be filling out a timesheet practically for them every week?
You need to have a record of
them filling in the hours that they were. So if it's normally 9 to 5 and they want to work 8 to whatever, but just to make sure that that's recorded.
Yes, and just on that, there could be an issue in relation to that they're choosing to work from 8 o'clock at night till 12, and then they're getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning. You know, they're not getting their daily. There's actually a requirement that you have an 11-hour break between you finish work and you start work. So as long as it's compliant with all that, and there's 35 hours every 7 days, it doesn't have to be Saturday and Sunday. It could be Tuesday and Wednesday. Depending on the business. If, all the work could be at the weekend, or the majority of work could be busy at the weekend, and you could be off Tuesday and Wednesday, which will give you the 24 hours plus the daily rest, which is 35. So
it's a lot more work for an employer, really, if you have somebody working remotely, if you have to have all this paperwork, as opposed to coming in 9 to 5.
Well, I would argue you have to have that anyway. It's just, and there is huge advantages to working from home. There's challenges with health and safety, and you have to be mindful of health and safety. There's also stress is a big thing. Right through COVID, a lot of the number of times I've seen and getting phone calls in relation to we've an issue here. Someone's after coming in. They're after telling the supervisor exactly what they think of them or the manager, and there's after been a big flare-up, and it's all down to...
So it wasn't a nice thing what they said.
Yeah, and you need to be mindful of, the levels of absenteeism. If you've low levels of absenteeism, it's an indication that there's not likely to be that much stress, that people seem to be happy enough. But if the levels of absenteeism start to climb, you need to watch that. Sicknesses, injury, things like that, just to be mindful of that from a stress. And then dealing with stress, communication, doing all the things that we should anyway, being clear, I suppose, and everything we do in HR, as people know, is meeting that psychological need we have to know where we stand. Like if your contracts of employment, your procedures, they're all about that. And right through the change, we're saying, this is what we're doing, and working with you, on what's expected, what's, what we want you to do, and how we want to do it, and what works for you as well as for us. And there's nothing wrong with that, and it's in the interest of everyone to do that, from the employer and the employee's point of view.
Yeah, so it's a positive experience. Just one of the things I suppose employers might come up against, if somebody's working remotely and they, the employer wants them back into the office for, it might be for whatever the nature of the business is, and the remoter is like, no, I'm happy just doing my work at home. What way does the employer tackle that? I mean, can they be firm and say, no, you need to be in the office, or, how?
Well, I suppose how we deal with stuff, how we deal with everything is how we treat people. And I would say that in them circumstances, we need to have a discussion and talk to them about what the issues are, what would work, what can we do something for you or work with you and move a little bit, or is it possible from and it may not be from the business point of view, and sometimes it's the employer's the problem in that you're saying, we're being a bit of a stuck in the mud, and we need to just reflect on what we're doing, or can we move and be a bit accommodating, because there's an opportunity to show that we're as I say, we're on your side, and everyone else is. Other people tend to find out, we're having a problem with Donna, so she wants to do X and the company wants to do Y, and how did we deal with it? And if we dealt with it, if we can't concede anything to Donna, and we explain that from a business perspective it's just impossible, Donna's likely to understand that, but a lot of the time that's not the case. A lot of the time there is scope for movement. We can move some way to that, but maybe not the whole way. And then you're happy that you understand where we're coming from, and I understand where you're coming from. And it's kind of building the relationship as well. It's not burning bridges.
Yeah, I suppose that was one of the things actually, Riona, I wanted to just move to you, and just on that subject though as well, in regards to the, you know, remoters and people on site and that sort of thing. Do you feel that the dynamic has changed with workers? So just again on that subject of, I suppose what I'm getting at is, you know, would employees who maybe are happy to go in to on site, and those that are being a little bit firmer about wanting to remain remote, does it change the dynamic there? And or maybe do some people feel there's, oh, they're getting preferential treatment if they're working remotely? Like, you know.
I kind of echo a little bit of what Paul is saying there around, you know, for me, a case, or if something like that was to arise, it is, you know, anything can be settled with a discussion about understanding what's going on. But for us, specifically in College Group, we have, I think, from a team of 12 that were kind of the support function. So most of our, actually all of our employees, bar this specific 12, remained on site throughout the pandemic, so we stayed open. But our office space just wasn't fit for, in the beginning of, when we went into lockdown in the beginning, it wasn't fit for that many people. So our finance team went remote. Most of our employees have worked with us for almost 30 years and had never heard from working from home. And our CEO, who funnily enough is also my dad, the idea of working from home, I think he might have, I was kind of half thinking, was he your client? You know, when we suggested to him, you know, I think we're going to take this Zoom call pre the pandemic from home, in his head, work was you clock in at 9, you leave at 5, and it's not a strict environment or anything, but we had to really support people. Mindset, it's the mindset, and we had to support, I think it was roughly 8 women who had never worked from home, again, overnight, incredibly busy roles that they all do, to kind of operating out of their kitchen, wherever it was, and creating these home offices. And I think for the most part, we're now about 12 months in, or maybe over that, I can't even think what way the pandemic went. And I think you know, I think we have to take it as things come up. I think a lot of people have settled into working from home. They've got their routine and their rhythm. But to answer your question around dynamic, I think it's important that you just keep in touch, and that you also consider, similarly with remote employees, but also employees on site, what's going on for people in their life, and what's kind of impacting how they're feeling about their work, whether that is at home or on site. And I think trying to make it as cohesive as possible, and bringing people who are remote working on the journey as well, helps to avoid any kind of, I think, friction. Gap or friction, and just keeping in touch would be my kind of...
And do you think for you now and your business operations, do you think that the hybrid or the unconstrained type working would work for the future for you?
I think because we're production, it won't. So our production employees, we have to work with the pandemic, and similar to what you know, what Tanya was saying, we had to work with things like shift and understand how that works best from a health and safety perspective, and making sure everybody felt safe at work. I think going forward, you know, we're growing as a business, and we're hiring kind of more at that business development level. We're hiring in that kind of, I guess, I can't ever remember what generation it is, but the generation that does want to travel, that wants to be remote working. And I think we will have to flex as employers to understand what makes the employee want to take an offer with us. So I think if hybrid, pandemic aside, is the way we have to recruit for the future, we would be very open to it. But I think you need to have firm processes in place to ensure that everybody still feels part of the group, that everybody still feels heard, you know, that there is still a team atmosphere. But we would be interested in hybrid. I don't think it would be our first port of call, given that we do have a production site.
Exactly. And I suppose the positives for some employers as well is, if they are going to do the remote work and the unconstrained thing, is that they don't have to hire big offices and have overheads and pay rates and that sort of thing. They can, as one of your clients did, or you know, that kind of more confined kind of, well, less expense really. Although that's another thing actually that might, would employers would they have to set up the employee as a remote worker, like, so they'd have to buy the ergonomic chair and the desk and that, like what way does that work for remote workers?
There's a duty of care from a health and safety point of view, so you do have to be the ergonomics and you look into that area of and the desks and there's appropriate.
So employers would have to invest in that type of
yes,
scenario.
definitely ensure that's available to the employee.
And that they have a space for work.
Yes.
And I suppose I've kind of touched on this already about employers. Do they have to? We've all had to be kind of delicate around COVID and working from home, and has it shifted for anyone? And has anyone taken a firmer line to kind of say, no, we need you in? Has anyone experienced that, or?
I think from our side, it's more kind of going back to the point around making sure that people do feel comfortable and safe coming to work. And I think, but speaking from our perspective, we made every decision from a health and safety perspective, from our outlook, I guess. And I think if anyone did push back, or you have to take on board what's going on personally for that individual and really understand why there might be some resistance or anxiety. And often, I've had it where we have to cover a reception, and one lady it was in the height of the numbers being up in the thousands, and she just didn't want to come into work, and you have to empathise, I think.
Absolutely,
you've got to meet somebody halfway, in my opinion, and say, I can understand this is really challenging for all of us, and kind of, but I think it is the discussion, it's understanding what's going on for the individual and trying to work around that as best possible, because it's not normal circumstances
really
that we're operating in.
And it's changing so much all the
I think in
time.
hospitality we don't have that luxury of remote, because in hospitality you're selling an experience, and people aren't going to accept that, oh, by the way, your waiter's at home and he take the order. So while you're trying to keep the environment safe, we're at the mercy of customers as well. And sometimes the difficulty is that, and within hospitality, people haven't been out in so long that they get out and suddenly they forget. And I think that some of the difficulty we have is that staff can be overwhelmed by the customers and their reaction to it. And they're just caught, and it's like, where do I go? You're telling me one thing, they're doing another thing. And I think for us in hospitality, that's a big challenge, because we can do everything we can, follow health and safety, but the unknown incident or the unknown that's there is the customer experience. But if we don't give the customer the experience they want, then we can't operate. So it's really catch-22. And I suppose even with the recent news now, I understand everyone wants, the restaurants want to open and they're ready to open.
It's frustrating.
But it's the unknown how the customer reacts, because you can have all the rules in the world, and I know they're talking about vaccinating, and you can turn around even like lockdown 2, when you're saying to people, can we take your contact number? That's a guideline we're given by the government, not us. We train our staff, why they do it, they understand it, and the customers, I'm not giving you my number.
And do you know what, actually I heard on the radio this morning was interesting as well, the way they're planning to do only vaccinated people indoor dining. The majority of the people serving will tend to be younger people, so it's a strange...
Well, I don't know how you have it, but one of the questions that's starting to come up now, and even I think we touched on it before, is we do have staff who are questioning why, if I'm vaccinated and Mary Jo, say, is choosing not to be vaccinated, where do we stand? Because you know, as a duty of care, you have to try and remove that risk for someone. So you removing a personal choice, I mean, that's going to be a very difficult discussion to have. And again, it'll be very much by how the government guidelines operate. Because what are you going to do to a customer? Because that customer, if they choose not to and you tell them they can't come in, they're going to go off and negatively tell that experience, and that's your business damage. And I think in hospitality, it feels sometimes it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. And you do your utmost to train the staff, follow health and safety, communicate, discussions, everything, but you still have that wild card of how people react. And I totally get and understand that, I'm one of those people, if you like, But the difficulty is from a HR perspective, a management perspective, is you're telling your staff we want you safe. And then the anomaly happens and they're confused. We're confused because we're trying to tell them. You're trying to tell a customer. And then the customer just sees it as negative and going, well, if you don't need my business, I'll go elsewhere.
Yeah,
so
exactly,
this vicious circle.
It is.
But vaccinations is one thing that's going to come up. And I know we're all just kind of waiting to see how
it's going to play out.
It's going to operate. But
yeah, I think they're talking about some
it's like a
digital
code or something. But still, how, like, there's still people who won't give you a phone number, you know, and there's still people who say, well, I'm coming inside because it's raining outside. And in hotels.
And I do think that whole GDPR thing is going to kick off as well, even with remote workers and, you know, and as you say, the giving of information, you know, of what vaccines or whatever health information. I'm going to a restaurant. You know, I think that's going to be huge into the future. But anyway, I think that's everything covered. I think we've chatted for unless anyone else has anything to offer. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'd like to thank the Newgrange Hotel. Joanne, thanks so much for allowing us to film here. We hope you, the viewer, have had some good takeaways from today and that having heard from our panel experiences as well, it may help you navigate your way through these testy times. If you want to contact our panel of experts here today in connection with anything we've discussed, please contact the County Meath Chamber. Email info@countymeathchamber.ie, or you can give them a call on 046 904 6060. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. I really appreciate it. It's been really enjoyable, and we've gone over time, which is perfect. And we hope you've enjoyed the roundtable talk today. And all that's left for me to say is thank you for watching.